awakening to all pious yogis. We shall continue to discuss about the 7 stages of purification. So the first stage of purification is Sila Visuddhi, or purifications of moral conduct or morality. The second stage of purification is Citta Visuddhi, purification of mind. Samatha meditators could attain 2 kinds of purification of mind. That is through the attainment of Upacara Samadhi, access concentration, or neighborhood concentration. The other concentration is known as Appana Samadhi or Jhana Samadhi. Samatha meditators are not able to make progress to the next stage of purification onwards because their object of concentration, most of object of concentration are concept or panyati. If samatha meditators wish to make progress to the third stage of purification and onwards, then they must be able to realize the true nature of Paramatha Dhamma, the ultimate realities. So at the time, samatha meditators like you, they have to begin to mindful of the 5 aggregates of clinging as they really are, or in other words, be mindful of the Namarupa, mental and physical phenomena as they really occur. By being mindful of the 5 aggregates of clinging as they really are, then they shall realize their true nature, in the words anicca, dukkha, anatta. Samatha meditators have to realize the specific characteristics or individual characteristics of 5 aggregates or Namarupa clearly. Then they can realize their 3 common characteristics well. So there are 2 kinds of realities taught by the Buddha. The first is known as conventional reality, sammuti satya. The other is ultimate reality, which is also known as Paramatha Dhamma. The conventional realities are not really exist. The conventional realities can exist is due to the conceptual thoughts of the conceptual thoughts of the mind, or we can say is the constructions of the mind. For example, we may give a name in accordance with the shape or the form of that being. So, for example, dog, cat, or man, woman, and so on. So this name is due to the conceptual thoughts of the mind. And this conventional reality is also used as a way of expression, vohara, or communications. But ultimate realities are different from conventional realities. They exist because of their own intrinsic nature or sabhava. But when we want to explain about Paramatha Dhamma or ultimate realities, we also need a kind of language or conventional language or vohara in order to communicate to others. If there's no conventional language, then it's not possible to explain to you about ultimate realities such as 5 aggregates and their characteristics, and so on. So when we talk about, for example, Rupa or Vedana or Patavi Dhatu, Vayu Dhatu, and so on, this name is known as Vijayamana Panyati, or in the teaching of the Abhidhamma. So Patavi Dhatu, Vayu Dhatu, and so on do exist because of their own intrinsic nature, or they mean sabhava, or they have this nature known as sabhava. So then they are what I call so these are known as concept of the real. Or concept of the real means like Rupa, Vedana, Patavi Dhatu, Vayu Dhatu. This is known as a direct concept of the real. Then there are concept of unreals. For example, a house, a mountain, a village, and so on. These things do not have their own intrinsic nature. So the Abhidhamma, the comprehensive manner of Abhidhamma, explains about 6 folds of this concept. So just now I have explained the first one, a direct concept of reals. So when we mention Rupa, consists of Patavi Dhatu, Vayu Dhatu, Vedana, feeling, and so on. These are the direct concept of the reals. And then the forms such as a house, a chariot or a car, village, and so on, are the concept of the unreal. For example, if you dismantle or remove the door, the house, the ceiling, the roof, the wall, the windows, then do you think that house does exist? So eventually you will not see a house there. That house is no longer exists. Then the third is a concept of the unreal by means of the real. The example given here is a possessor of 6-fold knowledge, or possessor of abhinya, or six kinds of abhinya. Possessor is a person who is endowed with these 6 abhinya. So possessor is a concept of unreal. But 6 kinds of abhinya is a real, or concept of the real. Sometimes we use what called concept of the real by means of unreal. This is the 4 kind of panyati. For example, man's voice. So voice is real. Man is a concept of unreal. Then the 5th one is a concept of the real by means of the real. For example, eye consciousness. So eye consciousness can arise because there's a what called condition known as eye sensitivity. So consciousness is real. The eye sensitivity is also real. Then number 6 is a concept of the unreal by means of the unreal. For example, king, sun. King is a concept of unreal. Sun is also a concept of the unreal. So our practice of mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation, is concerned about Vijayamana Panyati. That's why during the practice of mindfulness meditation, we do not take note or be aware of the physical body or the physical food and so on. For example, in your walking meditation, some of you note what's on heel lifting, but heel is a concept, or concept of the unreal. You can't realize any characteristics in that concept here. So that's why we do not take note of the unreal. We do not mindful of the unreal. What should be mindful is real, something that's real. So what is the things that is real here? The lifting. So these movements is known as lifting. So this name lifting is known as Tatya Panyati. Tatya Panyati. So Tatya Panyati means the common terms or conventional language used by everyone. But if you know these movements and lifting movements, you have not yet known the genuine Paramatha. So when you are mindful of any phenomena, you make labeling, lifting, or pushing, dropping during walking meditation, or when you know there's rising movement abdomens, you know rising. So these are known. This name or terms are known as Tatya Panyati. So you know these movements as lifting, pushing, dropping, rising, and so on. This nature awareness is not yet amounting to knowing genuine Paramatha or the real Paramatha. How are you going to realize or to know the genuine Paramatha Dhamma? So you have to be mindful of the actual process of movements, or you have to pay attention to the actual process of movements. So if you do not pay attention to that actual process movements as it really occurs, then you could not realize the genuine Paramatha. You only knowing the name. So even though you could make many mental noting or labeling, yet you are unmindful of your object that you were noting. Yet you can't realize the real Paramatha Dhamma. That's why we always remind the mindfulness meditators that they must perceive the object well. So they must perceive the movements well, or they know the movements clearly, then they make the mental noting. So in this meditation, noting or labeling is a technique or tool to develop mindfulness or to cultivate more and more attentive, precise, and energetic mindfulness. So this noting or labeling helps the meditators to be more mindful or to pay more and more attention to the Paramatha Dhamma. But at the beginning of practice, and when the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, meditators are not able to go beyond concept immediately. For example, you do sense that the abdomen is moving, then you can put mindful note rising and falling. But you should train your mindfulness so that the mindfulness will be able to perceive the process of movements clearer and clearer. So in other words, you do not pay attention to the shape or the form of abdomens. When you feel a strong pain, sometimes you know the pain is arising on the shoulders or at the knee and so on. But when you mindful and no pain, your concern is the painful feeling or not the locations or which part of the body or which organ that you feel the pain. So we need to make use of this tool or noting or labeling for the purpose of directing the mind to perceive the ultimate realities clearer and deeper. If there is no noting or labeling, and the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, then the mind could be wandering thinking quite frequently. So noting or labeling can happen in two ways. As long as the mindfulness and concentration are not strong enough, and the experience of mindfulness meditation is not yet up to the advanced stage, have not reached the advanced stage, most likely meditators may have to make mental labeling quite frequently. So at that time, meditators might have to mentally say, for the lifting. But first of all, they must perceive the process of lifting movements well and note lifting. While making the labeling lifting, they make sure that the mindfulness or attention of mind is staying with the movements, or doesn't go to the labeling. If the mindfulness or awareness has gone to that label, then meditators can't experience the ultimate reality, which is the movements itself. If the mindfulness and concentration are not yet strong enough, and meditators have not yet gained a lot of experiences in mindfulness meditation, and then if they do not make any noting, labeling, they can't mindful of the phenomena well. So that's why we have to make use of the tool mental labeling for the purpose of developing the mindfulness and leading the mind to perceive the ultimate reality clearer and clearer, or better and better. Then when mindfulness meditators have make some progress in the mindfulness, and the perception is getting stronger, then it seems like the mind can make mental noting by itself. So that at that moment, the mindfulness also includes the noting itself. So at that time, the mindfulness could perceive, for example, a lifting movements, know it by itself, and the mindfulness is also staying with the movements. But if the mindfulness meditators do not know how to sustain the effort of viriya and the practice, eventually the mindfulness getting weaker, then the mind seems like stop noting. Very soon the mind also wandering away or thinking. So meditators have to quick enough to know that the mindfulness is getting weaker. Then they have to increase the viriya and make mental labeling again. So mindfulness meditators have to make use of this tool on mental labeling wisely in order to make progress in mindfulness. If the practice is going well, sometimes meditators could realize Paramatha Dhamma clearly. So when meditators could realize Paramatha clearly, then what's the experience at that moment? If meditators do realize Paramatha Dhamma clearly, they will realize the instant arising and passing away of every phenomenon. As you know, arising and passing away of Paramatha Dhamma is very rapid, very swift. At that time, the living is not able to catch up with the rapid process of the Paramatha Dhamma. If the practice has been going well, the mind will drop the noting by itself. At that time, there is merely awareness or mindfulness. So only meditators could mindful of the Paramatha Dhamma well, then they can make progress to the third stage of purification. That's the Ditti Visuddhi. So this is a foundations or the beginning of the progress in insight meditation, Vipassana Bhavana. So this way of mindfulness meditation begins with 4 material elements. For example, at the beginning of sitting meditation, meditators are instructed to begin the sitting meditation by being mindful of the movements of abdomen. Movements is Vayodhatu, wind element. During sitting meditation, during walking meditation, meditators also instructed to mindful of the movements of foot, such as left, right, lifting, pushing, dropping. During sitting meditation, whenever meditators could not perceive the movements at all, in those the movements has stopped or unclear at all, then they are instructed to direct the attention to sitting postures and note sitting. So the postures of sitting remains upright. It's also due to the manifestation of the wind element. So the nature of wind element also includes support, the nature support. But as long as meditators have not yet gained strong mindfulness and deep concentration, they can't experience the nature support clearly. So they should not search for the experience of support. They should not look for it. But when you have developed sharp mindfulness and deep concentration, then you can see it or realize the nature support clearly. In other words, all kinds of Paramatha Dhamma do exist by themselves. They have their own intrinsic nature. But as long as mindfulness meditators have not yet developed sharp mindfulness and deep concentration, then they could not realize their intrinsic nature or sabhava. So in order to realize their own intrinsic nature, you need to attain purification of mind. In those meditators have attained momentary concentration for a period of time, as long as possible, and the mind is free from mental hindrances and other mental defilements. So during the sitting meditation, sometimes meditators have to take sitting postures and 2 touching points as a basic object. The label touching is a concept. So every touching point or every context consists of 4 material elements. So this context consists of Potapa Rupa, tactile objects or tactile phenomena. Potapa Rupa consists of 3 earth element, Patavi Dhatu, Tejo Dhatu, fire element, and wind element, Vayu Dhatu. Potapa Rupa does not include water element or Apo Dhatu. In accordance with the teaching of Abhidhamma, water element has the characteristics of cohesion. So it's because of this characteristic of cohesion. That's why all the four elements are cohere together. So we cannot sense directly the characteristic of cohesion. Potapa rupa means you can sense directly through the contact. So when mindfulness and concentration are getting stronger and stronger, sometimes meditators pay attention to the one touching point or a context. Sometimes they could not perceive any contact or touching, but maybe one of the material elements, for example, heat. Then, and the heat is overwhelming, then they should mindful note heat, heat, or hot, hot. So during sitting meditation, if there's a body sensation arising, for example, pain, then meditators have to mindful and note pain, pain, if the pain is the strongest phenomenon. So at that time, meditators should perceive the painful sensation as it really occurs. They do not have to pay attention to the location or which part of the body and so on. And it's not necessary to make a distinction of the pain. For example, is a piercing pain or cutting pain or hot pain and so on. If meditators begins to look at the pain in this way, it will involve more analyzing, thinking, and concept. So sometimes meditators think that by making a distinction, this pain is a piercing pain, cutting pain, or like pain, like the pain bitten by the ants and so on. They think this is the characteristic of pain, but this is not the characteristic of pain. The specific characteristics or the individual characteristics of the painful sensation is merely experiencing an undesirable object. Do you think poking, what called piercing pain is desirable, but cutting pain is undesirable? In fact, both types of pains are not desirable, isn't it? So during the practice of mindfulness meditation, be mindful of mental state that's arising at the present moment is very important. So meditators must be able to perceive the process of painful sensation, perceive the thinking process or any processes of mental state as it really occurs. Sometimes meditators merely report in the interviews that when they're thinking, they're mindful, and then they know it, the thinking disappear. But if they were asked further how the thinking was disappear, some of them may not able to perceive it clearly, not able to report it clearly. Then most meditators did not report, for example, the process of the arising of the pain. So the process of arising of the thinking or any mental states. So during walking meditation, meditators could be mindful of the movements, which is the wind element, as well as other material elements quite frequently. For example, when you're mindful of the touching, that touching, when you put the foot down, then you come to perceive the touching. That touching also consists of four material elements. So meditators should not purposely sense the floor. For the sense the floor, the coldness of the floor, hardness of the floor, or smoothness of the floor. If meditators purposely sense the floor, sensing the floor, pay attention to the floor, either coldness or hardness, this is not mindfulness meditation. We should realize that mindfulness or awareness can arise because an object has a reason. We have discussed this point in one of the previous talks, where we use the example of the consciousness of hearing. Then during the mindfulness activities, meditators may are mindful of many process of movements as well as contact. When there's contact of your body with a with physicality, for example, when your hand touching the spoon, touching the cup, you should also be mindful, not touching once or twice. So meditators could be mindful of processor movements very frequently, especially during walking meditation and mindfulness of daily activities. Meditators could perceive movements clearer and clearer. Eventually, they also could perceive or realize the other material elements clearer. In other words, the characteristics of the earth element and fire element. So when meditators could realize the characteristics of, in other words, here means the individual characteristics of the material elements clearer and clearer, they also begin to realize the mental state and the consciousness clearer and clearer. Sometimes meditators intentionally making effort to watch or to observe the process awareness or the noting mind. But as long as meditators have not yet realized the material elements clearer thoroughly, they could not really perceive the awareness or the consciousness clearly. So meditators should not purposely make an effort to watch or to observe the awareness, the process awareness. We always say the material elements, rupa, is quite coarse, but the mental phenomena that includes consciousness are quite subtle or subtle. In other words, it's easier to mindful and note material elements at the beginning of practice. So in other words, various material phenomena are coarse or can be perceived or sensed by the mind clearly and easily. So if meditators have not yet seen the material elements clearly, then they make an effort to watch or to observe the mindfulness or the noting mind. They can't see it well. So they should not purposely make an effort to watch the noting mind or the awareness. They should continue to pay more attention to the material elements such as the movements, heat, hardness, and so on. Yes. So when meditators could realize the specific characteristics of material elements clearly, seeing movements as movements, heat as heat, hardness as hardness. So at that time, there's only full attention on the phenomenon such as the movements, heat, or hardness. Then eventually, there will be a realization that the consciousness which is arising dependent on the material elements will become clear by itself. For example, there's realization that when there's movements, the consciousness of knowing will appearing at that process movements instantly. So this consciousness will realize the movements which is one of the Paramatha Dhamma. So the consciousness here is different from the worldlings. The worldlings might say, I become conscious of my hand moving.
ค่ะ
I become conscious by my body is bending and so on. But the experience of mindful meditators, Vipassana meditators, is different from the experience of the worldlings or those who do not practice mindfulness. So at that time, it can be seen that the consciousness arising very naturally with the arising of the ultimate realities, for example, movements, heat, or pain, and so on. So at that moment, there's no self or yogi behind these two processes. When there's a arising of a physical phenomenon, for the movements, then the consciousness which is arising dependent on the movements will be arising very naturally and very instantly. So there's no self or person who has to make an effort for the arising of this consciousness or the occurrence of this consciousness. So there's realization that the consciousness has a characteristic of knowing, going towards the object. Do the physical phenomena such as movements, heat, hardness have the characteristics of knowing or going towards the mind? Is the mind goes to the object, not the physical goes to the mind. So if the effort is sustained, then there will be realization of the cause and effect between the mind and the physical phenomena. So if the effort concentration, if the effort mindfulness concentration are sustained, then there will be realizations that a process of movements is preceded by intention. So there's no self or yogi behind that mental state of intention. Meditators have to know from their practice whether or not they have developed momentary concentration for a period of time and can be sustained day by day. So we always encourage meditators to develop momentum mindfulness continuously for about 4 to 5 hours. Even though they put forth effort to develop 4 to 5 hours of momentum mindfulness, they still have to put enough effort at other period of time, and there's no what called disruptions to the continuity of mindfulness. For example, when you could not practice mindfulness in details, you're still able to sustain a continual mindfulness, where the mindfulness could be active, be mindful of these process movements, then suddenly perceive the other process movements, then you just follow the mindfulness. For example, when meditators are mindful of the chewing, if the movements of hand is still in progress, for example, putting down the spoon, if the mindfulness is good, is sharp, the mindfulness will perceive one of the processes for the chewing process. So while perceiving or mindful of chewing process, sometimes, for example, the mindfulness goes to the other process by itself. The meditators will mindful the other process. And maybe meditators perceive the touching of the hand with the table, then realizing that there's a process following. When meditators realizing there's a process following, the mindfulness actually has appeared there, has gone there. So while mindful is swallowing, assuming that the scooping process happening at that moment, if the mindfulness has noticed it, actually the mindfulness has appeared there, then should be mindful of that scooping process. So in this instant, there's a continuity of mindfulness. Although meditators could not mindful of every process movements from the beginning till the end. Then when meditators practice momentum mindfulness, then they have to mindful of every process whenever possible, every process from the beginning to the middle till the end of that process. So in that way, it's possible to develop constant and continuous mindfulness for most of the time, for the whole day. So if meditators can practice in this way, then it's quite definite that they will gain deeper and deeper momentary concentration and clearer experience. So their first experience, we can say experience of anatta, no self or not self. It's because there's a realization or experiencing that at each moment there's a pair of processes. During sitting meditation, there's realization that the phenomenon condition the arising of mindfulness or consciousness. For example, if there's a process of rising movements appearing at that moment, then the consciousness or the awareness will be appearing there instantly. But if the practice is not matured up to that point, then meditators have to make an effort to direct the awareness to the movements of the abdomen. So while mindful of movement of abdomen, if the mindfulness is not active, then that inactive mindfulness or passive mindfulness, you perceive other phenomena quite slow, especially the thinking mind or wandering mind. So then during the practice of walking and sitting meditation, there will be realizations that the physical phenomenon, for example the movements, is preceded by the intention, or sometimes an action is preceded by the wanting mind. Meditators did not have to look for the intention or try to feel the intention or the wanting mind. So there's realization that the arising of the intention or wanting mind is a natural mental process. Meditators could realize the arising of intention is natural mental process. If in the past they have been noting intention without perceiving the intention, merely make a mental note intention, then they will come to know the difference in these two experiences. If meditators who have made mental noting of intention without seeing it, actually they are mindful of that mental noting. So if they have been doing that for a long time, they will take that mental noting, or sometimes they say automatic noting, as an intention. But they say those meditators who have made the mental noting intention without seeing it, if they do realize a mistake, and then they stop the mental noting of intention, if they do not see it, they actually could not see it anymore. But eventually, they could follow the practice correctly and have developed sharp mindfulness and momentary concentration. They will see the arising of intention or wanting mind naturally. So that real experience overcoming the view of self at that moment. So at that time, there's a clear experience of what called interconditionality between the mind and physical, or mentality and physicality. Then they only begins to see the three common characteristics through personal experience. So the foundation of progress is overcoming the view of self during the practice. This is known as Ditti Visuddhi. Then very soon they will realize the next Visuddhi, or Kankha Vitarana Visuddhi, purification by overcoming doubt. What is the doubt here? The doubt here refers to the notion of thinking. Is there a self? Is there a person? Is there a yogi? Is there a permanent soul? This DT is an immediate cause of what I call unwholesome conducts. DT is also immediate cause of arising of other mental defilements, clinging. But that clinging actually is conditioned by tanha or craving. So when craving getting stronger and stronger, then there be arising of clinging upadana. This is because of ignorance of the true nature of nama rupa, or the true natures of five aggregates of clinging. So meditators should put all effort to strengthen the mindfulness, in order to develop more and more attentive, precise mindfulness, and quite, we can say, energetic mindfulness as well, and can do it constantly, continuously. Then you shall realize the results of the practice of mindfulness. If the practice is not stable, then the experience also is not constant and stable. It doesn't mean that you have gained some experiences, then you have discontinued the practice, and then when you resume the practice, you shall begin from that stage of experience again. Even you can see from yourself that your practice is sometimes quite frustrating during the retreats. So sometimes you may have good practice, sometimes you may not have good practice, and so on. So I wish all mindfulness meditators will be heedful, able to put forth constant effort, able to develop firm effort, so that you could make progress in mindfulness. Even when you have make progress in mindfulness, surely you shall realize concentration and experiences of insight meditation, and able to achieve your spiritual goal eventually.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.